Hello, my art-loving friends. In today's video, I have to play with this gouache. And the reason I say I have to is because I'm teaching a gouache class this summer, and I wanted supplies that my students could buy and be ready to paint with $50 or less. So I trusted Sarah Burns' video about Arteza being the best student grade gouache that she tested. And if anyone knows gouache, it should be her. So we went with that because we can get this for around $24. And if I had my students buy professional grade gouache, which I would have loved to, they would have been up in the $100 range for their supplies. So they can take my class for $50 of supplies. That's the hope anyway. So let me show you what we have, and we will play with them and make sure they're actually going to work for everything I want to teach them in the class. So this is not part of what they need to buy. This is extra white in case the whole class starts to run out of whites. Then we have a little bit extra we can add to palettes, and that's hopefully going to work. Otherwise, I do have my big tube of Da Vinci white I can bring in. I have them get the Arteza 24 gouache set, and they are 12 mil tubes. 24 colors is more than they needed, and we won't use all 24 at first, so have no fear. They won't be overwhelmed by color choices. We are going to make it very minimal at first, but at least they'll have these other color choices later. And since the tubes aren't huge and you use gouache more than you would use up a watercolor, they'll be able to have some convenience colors once they get used to using it, and that will help save their main colors. This nice brush set, we hope it's nice anyway, we're going to find out. Transin. And this is kind of neat because it comes with this huge variety of sizes. We have angled, tiny round, kind of like a filbert. Yep, filbert. Pretty small round, a nice big flat, another couple of big flats, a small flat, a fan brush, medium-sized round, and this is kind of fun, palette knife. And then I have them choose one of these palettes. I happen to pick this Magello one because out of the four, this was the cheapest at that time. Now the prices change every day, but this intention on this gouache is not to keep it wet. I know from past experience, at least, that Arteza watercolor will mold even when poured into half pans and dried. I have mold on some of them that I actually need to get rid of. That's watercolor, so I assume with the trouble I've had with my gouache and my Stay Wet palette, the a couple of the M. Graham colors, there's no way I wanted to try and keep this gouache wet. But it re-wets, so they don't have to waste some of their paint. They can use it from the dried form, and we'll see what happens. The class is 6 weeks long, so I don't know if we'll have enough time to see if our dried out gouache will produce mold or not, but it'll be pretty obvious probably not long after that. Okay, so in this video I just want to do a few of the exercises that I'm going to have my students do. Make sure this gouache will perform like I'm used to, because basically I've just used my Holbein and M. Graham gouache. I've barely used the Artex gouache, the jelly cups, but sounds like those aren't great choices anyway for a class like this. And I really, really hope that Sarah was right and that this gouache will be the best for its price. One of the first things I'm going to have them try, one of many first things, is just a simple blend. And this set has ultramarine blue and a sky blue. It also has a cerulean blue here, but I don't think that's a color that I want to try for this. Let me see what it looks like actually. Yeah, nope, that is way too green. It has a little bit of green in it. But the ultramarine here looks like a nice deep blue, like it should be. And then if I use some of this sky blue, then I'm thinking I don't have to use as much white. It could be a good in-between. And then this set came with two whites, both PW6s, but different numbers, and one is showing more opaque than the other. So I'm going to try the less opaque one, since I'm mixing it in with blues anyway, and see what happens. I have a feeling we're going to go through a lot of white. And then I got this flat brush ready to see what happens. And so with gouache, you have to add just enough water to make it spread, but still be opaque. And that's the idea. I'm going to start with really dark, so that's not spreading well at all. So dip a tiny bit of corner in water. Get a little more water. That was too much. It's also getting used to these brushes that I had them buy, because they can't all go buy Sarah Burns brushes either, which I love, by the way. All right, pull in a little bit of this sky blue. So I'm having to add quite a bit of water to these, which is good to know. That's the whole idea of this experiment, is to figure that out. More of the sky blue. More water. I'm also using a paper that's very dry. It is B100% cotton paper, but I noticed lately it just feels really dry every time I pull it out to use it. Yep. I think the brush is swallowing up a lot of the water that I'm putting out, so I have to keep that in mind. I use more water than I normally would because the brush is definitely gulping the water. It's a little too transparent. More paint. More paint. A corner bit of water. I have some places that looks like are kind of skipped a little, so I will see if I can go back in. This will be a good test. I had a little bit of too much ultramarine in the brush right there, but this will be a good test of going back over things and seeing what can be done after the fact. Places I need to fill in. I think I'm completely out of my ultramarine over here. So if I want more of that dark blue back at the top, I need to get some more ultramarine on the palette. Probably going to go through a lot of that. Be interesting to see how these choices work out this semester. It's a little hard to see with the camera in the way and studio lights glaring at everything, but I think that's a pretty decent blend. I've got a little clump of ultramarine over there, but could look like a cloud bank or something, I'm not sure. See, if I'm gonna go ahead and clean my brush a bit, get a fresh start on this lighter section down here. Yeah, that's better. Sometimes you just gotta clean your brush out. Kind of come back up. There, I like that. Okay, I think we're good with that exercise. We'll see how that dries, and then we'll try the next exercise I want to try with them. Little brighter colors. See what happens. It dried very nicely. It looks like I got maybe a little bit thin right here, so that's good to keep in mind for the future. And I will just pull this one off. In class, we're going to use this beautiful background that they create using the beautiful blended gradient for an actual project. However, I should have de-stuck that tape. It does rip the paper a little bit, but B paper tends to rip more easily than some others. Anyway, I want to do a more sunset-y type of blending and just make sure it works like I think it should. There is a very noticeable edge if you run your finger across that. Doesn't come off on my finger at least. So now I will tape down. I have to make sure I'm using the correct side of the paper. I'm going to tape down this paper and try my other gradient that I want to do with them, and I'm just flipping the tape around. Like this was taped this way to this, so I'm just flipping it around, taping it the other direction so all that paint left over is not on the close to the painted side. And the cat was sitting in my lap, so I have a lot of cat hair. Ooh, look at all that gouache crumble from the previous project. That's good to know. Would we have gouache crumble if we were using our other more expensive gouache? That is the question we need to answer at some point. So one good thing is I noticed when I did that first gradient, it felt like we were using quite a bit of paint. Oh, look at all the crumbles. Look at all the crumbles. So this is coming off of the tape and off of the tape onto my fingers. So I rubbed on the paper and it didn't come off on my fingers, but I rubbed on the tape and it's all over my fingers. Interesting. Grab a little cloth and brush that off, I guess. What was I saying? I have no idea. But it looked like from doing that gradient that we would probably go through a lot of our colors pretty fast. So I called the local art store. For me, local is an hour away, but from where I'm teaching this class, it's only 15 minutes from where I teach this class. And they sell only Holbein gouache, which is good because if my student runs out of an ultramarine during the class, they can run down there 15 minutes away to that store and get a very high quality ultramarine to replace it with, which is the whole idea. Introduce them to gouache with an affordable paint. They can enjoy the class, but as they start running out, they can replace it with more high quality gouache, and I think that's perfect. And the lady that I called at the store there, she said they sell 15 ml tubes of gouache, which is great. Usually when you buy Holbein gouache through Amazon or whatever, you get 5 ml tubes, really tiny. And she said the average price looked like it was around $16 and some change for 15 ml. So that seems pretty reasonable. For a local store like that, I think it's awesome. All right, so this gradient is gonna be more like a sunset, and we need to use some pinks. I actually may need to test a couple of these colors, like the rose versus the crimson red. Probably just open the lids and see what the colors look like to see what color I might want. I think the rose. So on this gradient, we'll be using the rose, a mid yellow, because we're gonna go from like rose to orangey. Interestingly enough, there is no orange in this set. The orangest orange we have is probably this mid yellow versus this vermilion red, so we'd probably mix the two to get an actual orange or something like that. But I will just use these two and our white. In addition to these three colors, probably need a little bit of blue to mix in, I suspect, with the rose. So we will add a little bit more ultramarine blue back on the palette. This mid yellow is quite pretty. That rose looks like the perfect color. They do have pigment information and light fast and transparency information on all these tubes. All right, so this gradient is going to be a little bit quicker gradient than we had last time. And I don't want it quite this rose, so I'm going to add a little bit of the blue into it. Make it more purpley. See how this consistency feels on the paper. Still a little thick, even though it felt so thin over here. It feels pretty good. Maybe a little thin. Add a little more rose in, get a little more opaque, and we're gonna add some white into that and some water. Bring that back up to increase the opacity. A little bit of water and more white. A little bit of that mid yellow. Ooh, pretty. But that was strong, stronger than I expected. Oh, that's pretty. Get a little more white. I need a little bit of water. Just a tad on the corner of the brush. I'm pushing down really hard now. I want to get some of that color out of the brush. Grab a little bit more of that darker color back at the top. It's still pretty watery, so I think I'll be okay. Ooh, that's pretty. A little bit more. Get some of that paint out by just dabbing it on the towel and grabbing some white and water. More white. And a little bit of water. And more of our mid yellow. Wow, that is way too strong. Looks, that's interesting. Our white there already hardened. Ooh, that's pretty. So now I just need some more white because I need to lighten up that midsection a lot. So I'm going to clean my brush completely. Some clean water in it. Keep some water in it. Grab some of that white, but I need to pull that into a clean place in my palette. And just lighten up this midsection. Ooh, yeah. Just like that. Gotta go clear to the edges. I have to be careful about that. Grab some of that darker color and get back in there. More of that. I still had a lot of white on my brush. I'm going to grab a little bit more of the rose. Before I add that rose in, I'm going to lighten up that midsection again. That's so pretty. A little bit more of the mid yellow. A little mix with the rose. Like that. Now go back into the pure rose. Oh, pretty. A little bit of water. A little bit more pure rose. A little bit of blue. A little bit of water, more blue. Yes, very nice. Cleaning my brush, grabbing some water and white. And some of this. Actually, let's just grab some of that. I just want to make this transition a little smoother. That's very nice. All right, we will, actually, I want to go ahead and add some more of this mid-yellow darker further down, but I can tell it needs to be thinner. Ooh, so that's more pure mid-yellow. That's quite pretty. And I'm just going to go ahead and take that off in very transparent wash because that's going to be covered up with other things later, and so just adding a little color to it is nice. Now I didn't get quite to the tape edges there. It's going to be kind of noticeable, but there, that maybe will fix it. We'll let that dry and see what it looks like. So while this is drying, I do want to do a couple of things in this palette. I don't want to completely set this palette up and let it dry because I want to do that with my students, and I'm not fully convinced that this gouache is going to dry very well. So I'm going to add just a few colors in here that I know I'll want permanently, like lemon yellow, and like let this one dry. So we'll squeeze that one in there. It still leaves probably, I don't know, 4/5 of the tube still in here. And let's see, after that would go the mid yellow, and then like the yellow ochre. Yellow ochre is probably going to be a pretty useful color. I'll go ahead and squeeze that one in. This set has 24 colors, and this is an 18 well palette. So I was thinking about just keeping the whites, using them right from the tube each time. Same with the black and gray, either keeping them out in the tube or just putting them here. I think what I will do, because I like blacks. I like using blacks. We'll squeeze that down in this corner, knowing that I'll probably use it, and we'll see how those 3 colors dry. I'm not going to do more than those 3 colors for now. There's a couple weeks till class, like I mentioned, and we'll see how that fares for then. And then I can use this little palette knife, scoop the remains of this mid-yellow out there, and put it in the palette slot that it will probably be in. The rest can be palette mud. Oops, didn't see that. That was off screen. This is getting pretty dry already. So the streaks I already had in it are pretty streaky, and I just streaked it more with my finger. But I think overall that's a pretty good blend, and I think this gouache will work just fine for their initial foray into gouache. Well, the next trial of these would be to paint a gouache painting and make sure it goes well. I've done several gouache paintings, some on the YouTube channel here and some not. Now this is part of a kit, all 4 of these, this one, that one, and that one. They're part of a gouache kit that Let's Make Art just released, and one of my students is subscribed and bought this kit. So he let me take pictures of their reference photos and then also make copies of their outlines, which these are pretty simple. You probably don't need the outlines, but it's fun to have them. So I don't have the video tutorials that come with these because they were exclusive to the Let's Make Art people that bought these boxes, but I'm pretty good at looking at photos and reproducing what I see. And this one here really strikes me. It's so pretty. So I think we should try this one. We'll paint that with this Arteza Gouache and see what we think. This kit came with the Daniel Smith gouache, but in teeny tiny little 5mm tubes. So if you want to check out their website, I will link their website below. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I just think what they do out there in the community is great. Their little kits are awesome, and they're just nice, sweet people that are worth supporting. All right, let's do this painting. This one also dried beautifully, which is great. All right, we need to do our national parks painting. That'll be so much fun. It's just interesting how the paint crumbles off from the tape. Be interested in the longevity of this paint. Let's see. Doesn't come off. On to the painting. Since this painting took about an hour and I kept the beginning of this video in real time, I'm going to go ahead and speed this part up. If you guys would ever like to see this in real time, let me know. I can put that over on my Patreon, or I can release it here if enough of you want it, but you guys have to tell me. I was glad that I had practiced with this gouache on the little gradients because this is a very large gradient. This paper is 9 by 12 and I chose to work on the Canson Montball paper. It's a block and it's not cotton, but it felt really, really great for this gouache. It seemed like the perfect paper, actually. And it is 140-pound cold pressed paper too. Now, to make this easier on myself for the gradient, I probably should have masked off the arch, but I didn't because I didn't want to. It just seems like more work than needed. So pulling the gradient around the arch definitely was tricky, trying to get it looking somewhat even, but it worked mostly, and the clouds and whatnot will cover it. Plus any discrepancies or whatever in it will just look like some clouds in the background. So I didn't worry too much about it. Putting these clouds on was super fun. I probably should have got the round brush out because I think the shape would have been a little bit better, but I actually really like how they turned out in the end. Speaking of the brushes, these work great for this application. Now, they are not as nice as Sarah Burns brushes. Definitely get those if you ever have the opportunity, but these are great. They perform beautifully, and I do pull out the round brush later and use it. Granted, I still haven't tried every single brush in the set. I tend to pick up one brush and use it for the entire painting, but I did try at least to use 3 of the brushes in the set, and they're going to work great for my class. Now, this Arteza Gouache set came with only 1 purple, and it's just not quite deep enough for what I needed it for, so I'm just adding a little bit of Prussian blue into it, and sometimes a little bit of ultramarine. And then I also mixed a little bit of the rose and burnt sienna together to get that really pretty desert color you're seeing in the background on the right side. And because I started my life out, my artistic life out as an oil painter, there's just something extremely satisfying about pouring paints directly from the tube when you need them. And granted, that won't always be the case. These colors will dry out in this palette eventually, and I'll end up using them from the dried state. But I tried not to pour too much into the wells. I tried not to pour more than I would use, but it did end up being more than I would use. So I have them in their wells specifically so that they'll dry in the correct place. Because I had put the yellow ochre and the black and the light yellow in there the night before, those were completely dry when I was doing this painting, and it did take a little bit of effort to re-wet them. So it's just like you would do with watercolors, especially stubborn watercolors. You need to spray your dried out gouache before using it, give it some time to activate, and then I would have no problem with it at all. I just didn't think of it because there was only 3 dried colors in here, and I wasn't even sure I was going to use those colors, but I did end up wanting to use a little bit of the black and a little bit of the yellow ochre, and I'm like, oh yeah, they definitely need to be re-wet because they'll re-wet with your brush, but why put in that extra effort when you can just spray them ahead of time and make them nice and juicy when you're ready to use them? Working with gouache is so much fun because it's like oil painting, but easier without the smell, and you get to re-wet things and reactivate things if you need to. It just gives you a lot of freedom in your painting, and it's a good feeling to have. Now, I recently found Allison Aletha Illustrations on YouTube. I will link her channel below. She is so much fun. She's a very young artist, but she is amazing, and she works mostly in gouache, so it's a really great channel resource if you are interested in gouache and want to see and learn from her. She scripts her videos. It's very professionally done. It's actually top notch, and I'm extremely impressed with her channel and with her. Another gouache artist I like to watch is Cécile Yadro, I think is that her last name. She's a French artist. She's just fun. She's such a cute little artist. Anyway, she's fun to watch, and she has some great lessons on her channel. Jess Chung, of course. Jess Chung also does a lot of Skillshare classes, but she has a lot of videos out here on YouTube. There's a couple of other gouache artists. I'm not remembering the names right off, but if I think of them, I'll list them in the description box below. Now on to a slightly different subject. I don't know if you guys remember my Christmas haul, but I will link that in the corner for you. I received a Pentalic Aqua Journal, and that paper is really nice paper, but it is not cotton. So it is cold pressed wood pulp paper, just is a high quality one though. And I think that sketchbook is absolutely perfect for a gouache practice. I can just imagine me filling all those beautiful pages with some pretty gouache paintings, and I'm excited to try that here eventually. I have so many gouaches that I need to try in my studio that I haven't gotten out. Ugh, so much to do, so little time, and I'm looking forward to every second of it. I am done. One bad news is I didn't realize I had this over by my water jar that I keep cleaning the brushes from. And so it was about 4 inches away and it got damaged, which is sad because I really liked it and had fully planned to make something out of it. So we'll see if that can be revived. I know I'm out of my tape line now, but it just won't be quite as pretty of a gradient as it was before, sadly. I don't know if it will ever be the same. So do not put your work next to your water jars. That's for sure. And yeah, I lost my tape line. I could have retaped this before trying to revive it, but I didn't think about it in time. So I'll just have to cut it apart later. All right, we'll see if that gets saved or not. But anyway, that was fun. This was a lot of fun. So both my dirty and my clean jars are a little dirty. I couldn't get all of the gouache out of the bigger brushes. This one in particular with just my dirty jar, and so I kept having to go from that into my clean jar, and so it contaminated it a little bit. Not very much, and it's not a huge deal. Oops, I don't need blue down there. Pay attention. I gotta pay attention here. I was just trying to fill in some of the whites of the paper that I didn't want in there. Well, that was really fun. What I did find out on this is the gouache does crumble apart. You can see that in the yellow ochre here and the black. And this is the Magello brand of palette, and the extra mixing space in there is super tight, and it's concave. So if I flip it over like that and put that in there, push it in, you can see it just stays. It doesn't flop out at all, but it puts a surface that's raised now against these, and so I can move these around and they won't fall out of these wells. Obviously this black in this well, because it's bigger well, will fall out, but this holds these down, and that's perfect. Well, guys, I can't say that I absolutely love Arteza Gouache, but it was fine. It was just fine to work with, and it will be fine for my students as well. I look forward to continuing my gouache journey. I wish I had time. I would paint the same thing with my Holbein and M. Graham gouache just to see what I think. Don't have time to do that today, but maybe I'll get to that very soon here. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day wherever you are, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye for now. He likes weed pulling. Yeah. That's funny. It's like the best thing ever, apparently. He's so helpful. That's so funny. He's a goofball.